When my granddaughter Lily whispered to her fiancé Marcus during Clara's memorial service that my blue-collar whining about my dead wife was getting tiresome, and they'd only been putting up with me for the money, something inside my chest went stone cold. I said nothing, just walked to my truck and drove straight to my lawyer's office that same afternoon, demanding he draft a legal notice for immediate repayment of the $30,000 I'd given them for their house down payment. 3 hours earlier, I'd been standing in my living room arranging folding chairs for Clara's memorial service, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. The afternoon light was streaming through the windows Clara had loved so much, the ones that faced the garden where she used to grow her prize-winning tomatoes. Lily had arrived early to help set up, bringing Marcus with her, and seeing them together in our home filled me with something I hadn't felt since Clara passed, hope for the future. "Grandpa Sam, these flowers are beautiful," Lily said, adjusting the white lilies we'd placed around Clara's portrait. "She would have loved them. Your grandmother always said flowers were God's way of reminding us that beauty grows from the dirt," I replied, watching her arrange them with the same careful attention Clara used to give everything in our home. "She taught you well." Marcus was carrying chairs from the basement, and I found myself genuinely grateful for his help. When they'd gotten engaged 6 months ago, I'd worried about losing Lily to someone who didn't understand our family's values. But watching him work without complaint, wearing the good shirt he'd bought specially for today, I felt ashamed of my earlier doubts. "Mr. Grant," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a dish towel, "Lily told me you and Mrs. Grant were married 47 years. That's something to be proud of." "Every day was a gift," I said, meaning it. "Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones." That's when I made the offer that would change everything. Looking at these two young people who'd shown up early to help honor my Clara, who'd driven 3 hours from their apartment in Harrisburg just to be here for me, I felt something warm expand in my chest. "You know," I said, settling into Clara's favorite chair, "I've been thinking about what Clara would want me to do with some of the money from her life insurance. She always worried about young people starting out, how hard it was to buy a first house these days." Lily looked up from the flowers, her eyes bright with curiosity. Marcus had gone still, that dish towel frozen in his hands. "I'd like to help you too with a down payment," I continued. $30,000. It's sitting in my retirement account, and Clara always said money was meant to help family build their lives. The silence that followed felt warm, full of possibility. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she came over to hug me, smelling like the vanilla perfume Clara used to wear. "Grandpa, that's incredible," she whispered against my shoulder. "We've been saving for 3 years, but house prices just keep going up. This would change everything for us." Marcus had set down the towel and was looking at me with something like awe. "Mr. Grant, I don't know what to say. That's beyond generous." "You don't need to say anything," I replied, patting Lily's back. "Clara always said the best investment was in people you love. You two are good kids with your heads on straight. You'll make something beautiful together." The doorbell started ringing then, as other family members and friends began arriving for the memorial. My sister Margaret came first, followed by neighbors who'd known Clara for decades, then cousins and work friends and people from our church. The living room filled with quiet conversation and shared memories, exactly the way Clara would have wanted. I moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and sharing stories, feeling surrounded by love and community. Every few minutes, I'd catch sight of Lily and Marcus helping serve coffee or directing people to the bathroom, and I'd feel that warm glow again. This was what family was supposed to look like. This was what Clara would have wanted. The formal service was brief, a few prayers, some favorite hymns, stories about Clara's kindness and strength. I spoke last, telling everyone about the woman who'd made me better than I ever deserved to be, who'd turned a rough electrician from South Philly into someone worthy of love. When I finished, the applause was gentle, respectful, full of genuine affection for the woman we'd all lost. As people began to mingle again, I found myself standing near the kitchen, accepting a cup of coffee from my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, when I heard familiar voices from the hallway. Lily and Marcus had stepped away from the crowd, probably thinking they were out of earshot. But 47 years of marriage had taught me to listen for sounds others missed, and electrician work had given me ears that could pick up the faintest hum in a wall. God, how much longer is this going to go on? That was Marcus, his voice completely different from the respectful tone he'd used with me all day. I know, right? Lily's laugh was sharp, nothing like the gentle sound I'd heard earlier. His blue-collar whining about Grandma is getting so tiresome. Like, we get it. You miss her. But does every conversation have to be about how wonderful she was? My coffee cup stayed steady in my hand, but something cold was spreading through my chest, like ice water in my veins. At least we only have to put up with him for a little while longer, Marcus continued. Once we get that down payment money, we can move to the suburbs and only visit for Christmas and birthdays. Exactly, Lily agreed. $30,000 buys a lot of distance from Grandpa's boring stories and this depressing neighborhood. I mean, look at this place. It's like stepping back in time. They laughed together then, a sound that cut through me like a live wire through skin. Mrs. Rodriguez was saying something to me about how Clara would be proud, but her words seemed to come from very far away. My hands weren't shaking. My face wasn't changing. But something fundamental inside my ribcage had just snapped into a different configuration. I finished my coffee. I smiled at Mrs. Rodriguez. I moved through the rest of the memorial service like a man underwater, hearing voices but not processing words, accepting hugs but not feeling warmth. When Lily and Marcus came to say goodbye an hour later, their faces were perfectly composed, full of artificial sympathy and gratitude. "Thank you again for everything, Grandpa," Lily said, kissing my cheek. "The offer about the down payment? Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure," I replied, my voice steady as granite. "You two deserve every penny." Marcus shook my hand with both of his, looking earnest and grateful. "Mr. Grant, this means the world to us. We'll pay you back as soon as we can." "Don't worry about paying me back," I said. "Family doesn't keep score." After they left, after the last guest had gone home, after I'd cleaned the coffee cups and folded the chairs and put away Clara's portrait, I sat alone in our living room and stared at the spot where she used to curl up with her crossword puzzles. I looked at the framed photo of Lily's college graduation, the one where she's wearing the cap and gown I'd paid for with overtime money from a 6-month project, rewiring an entire apartment complex. I remembered working 16-hour days in the Philadelphia heat, my hands bleeding from wrestling with stubborn conduit, because I'd wanted to give her something Clara, and I had never had a college education without debt. I looked at the wedding invitation on the mantel, the one for the ceremony I'd already agreed to pay for because Marcus came from a family that didn't believe in spending money on big weddings. Clara had been the one to suggest it 2 weeks before she died, whispering from her hospital bed that every girl deserved to feel like a princess on her wedding day. I looked at the thank you card from their apartment lease, the one they'd sent after I'd co-signed because their credit wasn't quite good enough on their own. 24 months of liability, of knowing that if they couldn't make rent, it would come out of the retirement account Clara and I had built penny by penny over 4 decades. That's when the memories really started flowing, like water through broken pipes in the walls. I remembered the call from Lily 3 years ago, crying because she'd crashed her car and didn't have money for the deductible. I'd driven to Harrisburg in the middle of a snowstorm and handed her $1,500 in cash, money I'd been saving to take Clara on a cruise for our anniversary. I remembered Marcus's student loan payments, the ones I'd been covering for the past 18 months because he'd graduated into a job market that wasn't ready for his talents. $473 every month, taken directly from my checking account while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to make the numbers work. I remembered the emergency room bill when Lily had her appendix out 2 summers ago. Their insurance had a $5,000 deductible, and they'd called me from the hospital, panicked and crying. I'd used the credit card Clara and I kept for true emergencies, the one we'd never touched in 20 years of marriage. I remembered the phone calls, every Sunday evening like clockwork, where they'd tell me about their struggles and I'd find another way to help. The rent deposit when they moved to the better apartment. The car repairs when Marcus's transmission died. The groceries I'd had delivered to their place during the 3 months when Lily was between jobs. Every memory came with a dollar amount, precise and unavoidable. $15,000, $347 over the past 3 years. Not counting the money I'd sent Clara's jewelry to get appraised for their inheritance. Not counting the life insurance money I'd already promised them. Not counting the $30,000 I'd offered just hours ago. I thought about Clara, lying in that hospital bed with the tubes and monitors, holding my hand while we planned their future. "Sam," she'd whispered, her voice already fading. "Promise me you'll take care of Lily. She's all the family we have left." I promised. Of course I'd promised. Clara's last words to me had been about making sure our granddaughter was provided for, protected, loved unconditionally. But Clara had never heard what I'd heard today. Clara had never stood in a hallway and listened to the people she died worrying about laugh at her memory, dismiss her husband's grief as blue-collar whining, calculate exactly how much money they needed to extract before they could escape to their better life. I didn't cry that night. I didn't rage or throw things or call them screaming. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on and opened the folder where Clara and I kept all our important documents. Then I started doing what I'd done for 40 years as an electrician. I began tracing connections, following wires back to their source, figuring out exactly how the current was flowing. The next morning, I was dressed and ready when Kinnear and Associates opened at 8 a.m. Jim Kinnear had handled Clara's will and our retirement planning for the past 15 years, and he'd always been straight with me about legal matters. "Sam," he said, gesturing me into his office, "I'm sorry for your loss. Clara was a remarkable woman." "Thank you, Jim. I need to talk to you about some financial matters." I laid it all out for him, the promises I'd made, the money I'd already given, the conversation I'd overheard at the memorial service. Jim listened without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The $30,000, he said when I finished. "You offered it verbally, but nothing's been signed?" "Nothing's been signed," I confirmed. "And the money you've already given them over the years, was any of that documented as loans?" "No, I treated it all as gifts. Family helping family." Jim leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the pad. "Sam, I have to ask, are you sure about what you heard? Sometimes grief can make us interpret things differently than—" "Jim," I interrupted, "I've been working with electrical currents for 40 years. I know the difference between a short circuit and a power surge. I know what I heard." He nodded slowly. "All right, then here's what I can tell you. The money you've already given as gifts is gone. Legally speaking, you can't demand it back. But the $30,000 you offered yesterday, that was conditional on your continued willingness to give it. You can absolutely change your mind. What about the co-signing I did for their apartment? That's trickier. You're legally liable until the lease ends. But," he paused, consulting his notes, "if they violate the terms of the lease in any way, late payments, property damage, subletting without permission, you might have grounds to withdraw your guarantee." I left Jim's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a growing sense of purpose. My next stop was Harrison and Associates, the accounting firm that had handled Clara's and my taxes for the past decade. Rita Harrison was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd helped us navigate the complexities of retirement planning after Clara's diagnosis. She listened to my story with the same professional attention Jim had shown, but her reaction was more immediate. "Mr. Grant," she said, "I'm not just your accountant. I'm someone who watched you and Clara build a life together through careful planning and sacrifice. What you're describing isn't just hurtful, it's financially predatory." She pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. "Based on what you've told me about your contributions to their expenses, you've essentially been subsidizing their lifestyle to the tune of approximately $600 per month for 3 years. That's money that should have been going toward your own retirement security. What would you recommend? Immediate cessation of all financial support. Document everything you've given them previously, not for legal action, but for your own tax records. And Mr. Grant," she looked at me seriously over her reading glasses, "consider whether these people deserve to inherit anything from Clara's estate." That afternoon, I drove to the job site where I'd been doing some consulting work since Clara's death. Bayfield Construction had hired me to oversee the electrical systems for a new housing development, and the project manager, Tony Reeves, had become something of a friend over the past few months. "Sam," Tony called out when he saw me walking across the muddy lot. "How was the memorial service?" "Educational," I replied. Tony must have heard something in my voice because he set down his clipboard and gave me his full attention. We'd worked together long enough that he knew when I had something serious to discuss. I told him about the overheard conversation, about the 3 years of financial support, about the $30,000 promise. Tony listened with the focus of a man who'd spent 20 years in construction, where you learn to spot problems before they become disasters. "Jesus, Sam," he said when I finished. "That's cold even by family standards. What are you thinking of doing?" "I'm thinking about teaching some lessons about consequences," I replied. "But I need to do it right. Methodical. Professional." Tony smiled grimly. "You know, we've got some openings coming up on the crew if you want to pick up more hours. Might be good to stay busy while you're thinking things through." "I appreciate that, Tony, but I've got a different kind of project in mind." That evening, I sat down at Clara's old sewing table, the one with all the little drawers and compartments, and began organizing my information like I was planning the electrical system for a skyscraper. Every conversation, every amount of money, every promise and every lie, laid out in chronological order. Then I opened my laptop and began researching. I learned about Pennsylvania's landlord-tenant laws. I learned about financial elder abuse statutes. I learned about the difference between gifts and loans in the eyes of the IRS. Most importantly, I learned about a little-known provision in apartment leases that allows co-signers to withdraw their guarantee if they can demonstrate that the tenant obtained the guarantee through false pretenses. By midnight, I had a plan with 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 would begin the next morning. At 6 a.m. sharp, I called the electric company where I'd worked for 38 years before retiring. My supervisor, Danny Kowalski, was just starting his shift. "Sam, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "Danny, I need a favor. I'm consulting on some electrical work for a young couple, and I need to check the grid connections for an apartment complex in Harrisburg. Specifically, the Meadowbrook Gardens development." "Sure thing. What do you need to know?" "I need to know if there are any code violations, any overloaded circuits, any reason someone might need to shut down power for safety inspections." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Sam, you're not thinking of doing anything that would get you in trouble, are you?" "Danny, I've never done anything in my career that wasn't by the book. I'm not about to start now." Within 2 hours, I had what I needed. Meadowbrook Gardens had been built in 1987 with electrical systems that were now considered substandard by current codes. The main distribution panel for Building C, the building where Lily and Marcus lived, was scheduled for replacement within the next 6 months due to safety concerns. I made a call to the building's management company. "This is Samuel Grant, licensed master electrician, state certification number ME 4419. I'm calling about Building C at Meadowbrook Gardens. I understand you're planning electrical upgrades, and I'd like to volunteer my services for the preliminary safety inspection." "Mr. Grant, that's very generous, but we already have a contractor lined up for—" "Ma'am," I interrupted politely, "I'm not looking for the job. I'm looking to provide a public service. I've been working electrical systems in this area for 4 decades, and I'm offering free preliminary inspection to identify any immediate safety hazards before your contractor begins work. This could save the building management significant liability issues." 2 hours later, I had official permission to conduct a safety inspection of Building C's electrical systems. I arrived at Meadowbrook Gardens at 3 p.m., wearing my cleanest work clothes and carrying the toolkit I'd assembled over 40 years of professional electrical work. The property manager, a tired-looking woman named Janet, met me in the lobby. "Mr. Grant, I can't tell you how much we appreciate this. With all the electrical fires you hear about in older buildings." "Safety first," I replied. "Always safety first." The inspection took me 3 hours. I went through every apartment in Building C, checking outlets, testing circuits, examining the connections in the electrical panels. Most of the systems were fine dated but functional. But apartment 3B, where Lily and Marcus lived, had some interesting issues. Someone had been overloading the circuits. multiple high-draw appliances plugged into extension cords, a space heater running off the same circuit as a window air conditioner, Christmas lights strung throughout the apartment in July, still plugged in and drawing power. All of it was technically legal. None of it was safe. "Janet," I said when I finished my inspection, "I need to recommend immediate correction of several code violations in apartment 3B. The tenants are creating fire hazards with their electrical usage." I filed my report that afternoon. By building management policy, Lily and Marcus had 72 hours to correct the violations or face lease termination for safety noncompliance. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m. "Grandpa Sam." Lily's voice was high and panicked. "We just got this crazy notice from our building management. They're saying we have electrical violations and we could be evicted. This is insane. We haven't changed anything in our apartment." "What kind of violations?" I asked calmly. "Something about overloaded circuits and fire hazards. They want us to unplug half our stuff and hire an electrician to inspect our outlets. We don't have money for an electrician right now, especially not with the down payment we're saving for the house." "The down payment," I repeated. "Right, the money you offered us yesterday. Grandpa, this couldn't have come at a worse time. If we get evicted, it'll ruin our credit and we won't be able to get the mortgage even with your help." I let the silence stretch out, listening to her breathe on the other end of the line. "Grandpa, are you there?" "I'm here, Lily. I'm just thinking. Would it be possible to get the down payment money sooner? If we could pay for the electrical work and maybe put down a deposit on a house right away, we could move out of this apartment before there are any more problems." "You want the $30,000 now? If it's possible. I know you said you wanted to help us, and this would solve everything. We could be out of this apartment and into our own place within a month." I thought about Clara, lying in her hospital bed, worried about Lily's future. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard just 24 hours ago. I thought about 3 years of blue-collar whining and the money they'd needed to tolerate me for. "Lily," I said, "I need to be honest with you about something." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some thinking since yesterday, and I've realized I'm not in the financial position to give away $30,000 right now. Clara's medical bills were higher than I initially calculated, and my retirement funds need to stay where they are." The silence on the other end of the line was complete. But yesterday you said." "Yesterday I was emotional and not thinking clearly. Today I've had time to review my finances with my accountant, and the numbers just don't work." "Grandpa," her voice had gone very small, "what are we supposed to do? We've been counting on this money. We already started looking at houses." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I replied. "You're both smart, capable people. You'll find a way." I heard Marcus's voice in the background, urgent and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. "Marcus wants to know," Lily said, "if this is about the money you've already given us, because we can't pay that back right now either. We used it for living expenses." "I never asked you to pay anything back," I said. "Those were gifts. Family helping family. Remember?" More background conversation, sharper now. "Grandpa, Marcus thinks maybe we should all sit down together and work out some kind of payment plan. Maybe you could help us with the electrical work now, and we could gradually pay you back for everything over time." "That's an interesting suggestion," I replied. "Unfortunately, I'm going to be pretty busy for the next few weeks. Tony Reeves offered me some extra consulting work, and I'm thinking about taking it." "But what about us?" The question hung in the air like a live wire, dangerous and exposed. "Lily," I said finally, "I spent 40 years climbing telephone poles and crawling through crawl spaces so I could take care of your grandmother and provide for the family we loved. I worked double shifts when you needed college money. I co-signed loans when you needed credit. I paid medical bills when you needed help. I did all of that because I believed family takes care of family. We know and we're grateful. But yesterday at your grandmother's memorial service, I learned something about what you and Marcus really think of me, about what those 3 years of help actually meant to you." Complete silence now, not even breathing. "I heard your conversation in the hallway, Lily." Every word. The phone went dead. For the next 2 days, my phone rang constantly. Lily called 17 times. Marcus called 12 times. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages started apologetic. They'd been stressed. They hadn't meant what they said. They loved me and appreciated everything I'd done. By the second day, the tone had shifted to desperate. By the third day, Marcus was leaving messages that bordered on angry. Mr. Grant, this is ridiculous. We're family. Families work through their problems. They don't just cut each other off over a misunderstanding. Lily is heartbroken. You're being cruel to your own granddaughter. On Thursday morning, I received a text message from Lily. Grandpa, we're coming over tonight to talk. This has gone on long enough. We can work this out if you'll just listen to us. That afternoon, I made a phone call to Jim Kinnear. Jim, they want to come over tonight to work things out. I have a feeling they're going to try to pressure me or manipulate me into changing my mind about the money. Are you comfortable having that conversation? I'm comfortable having the right conversation, I replied. But I want to make sure I'm protected legally. If they try to claim I promised them money, if they try to say they've been depending on commitments I made. Sam, do you have any way to record the conversation? I thought about that for a moment. Actually, I might. That evening, I was ready for them. I cleaned the house, made coffee, even put out some of Clara's good cookies. When they arrived at 7 p.m., I greeted them at the door with a smile. Lily, Marcus, come in. I was hoping we could clear the air. They looked relieved but cautious as they settled into the living room. Lily sat in Clara's old chair, which struck me as presumptuous, but I didn't comment. Grandpa, she began, we owe you an apology. What you heard the other day. We were stressed and upset and we said things we didn't mean. What specifically didn't you mean? I asked. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Grant, we would never deliberately hurt you. You've been incredibly generous with us, and we're grateful for everything you've done. But you did say my grief over Clara was tiresome, I replied. You did say my stories about her were blue-collar whining. Those were your exact words. Lily's eyes filled with tears. We were wrong to say that. We were having a hard day, and we took it out on you unfairly. But that doesn't represent how we really feel. Then how do you really feel? They exchanged a look, and I could see them recalibrating, choosing their words more carefully. We love you, Lily said. You're our family. Yes, sometimes your stories are repetitive, but that's just how grief works. We understand that. And the money? I asked. The $30,000 I offered? Marcus straightened up. Well, we were hoping we could still work something out. Maybe not the full amount right away, but something to help us with the electrical problems and the house down payment. We really have been counting on your help. You've been counting on it for how long? Since you offered it, Lily said quickly. But what about before that? Had you been assuming I would help you buy a house? Another look between them. We hoped you would, Marcus admitted. When Mrs. Grant was in the hospital, she mentioned wanting to help us get started in life. We thought maybe that would include helping with a house. And when you said you needed to put up with me until you got the money, I continued. How long had you been putting up with me? The room went very quiet. Grandpa, Lily said carefully, I think you're misremembering what we said. I'm 70 years old, not 90. My memory is fine. Marcus stood up. Mr. Grant, I think we should focus on moving forward, not rehashing a private conversation that was taken out of context. Sit down, Marcus. Something in my voice made him pause. After a moment, he sat back down. I want to tell you both a story, I said. It's about an electrician who spent his whole career believing that family comes first, who worked overtime and double shifts and weekend jobs so he could help the people he loved build better lives. I got up and walked to the mantel, picking up the framed photo of Clara from our wedding day. This electrician married the most beautiful woman in Philadelphia, and they built a life together based on taking care of each other and taking care of their family. When their son died in a car accident, they poured all their love into their granddaughter. They saved money they should have spent on themselves so she could go to college. They co-signed loans that put their own retirement at risk so she could have a nice apartment. They gave and gave and gave because that's what family does. Lily was crying now, but I continued. And when the beautiful woman got sick and was dying in a hospital bed, she made her husband promise to keep taking care of that granddaughter, to make sure she had everything she needed to build a happy life. I set Clara's photo back on the mantel and turned to face them. The husband kept that promise. He gave money he couldn't afford to give. He paid bills he shouldn't have had to pay. He supported two young people who seemed to be struggling to get established in life. Marcus had gone very pale. But then one day, at the beautiful woman's memorial service, the husband learned something. He learned that those two young people weren't struggling to get established. They were planning their escape. They had been counting his money and tolerating his grief and waiting for the right moment to take what they needed and disappear to a better life, far away from his depressing neighborhood and his boring stories. "Grandpa, please." The husband realized that his beautiful wife had died worried about the wrong thing. She'd been afraid their granddaughter wouldn't be taken care of. But their granddaughter was fine. She was smart and capable and perfectly able to take care of herself. What she wasn't able to do was love her family unconditionally. What she wasn't able to do was respect the people who had sacrificed for her. I sat back down in my chair and looked at them both. So the husband decided to stop enabling that behavior. He decided that love without respect isn't really love at all. And he decided that it was time for those two young people to learn what it feels like to build a life without someone else's money propping it up. The silence stretched out for a long time. Finally, Marcus spoke. "What are you saying, Mr. Grant?" "I'm saying the Bank of Samuel Grant is permanently closed. No more loans, no more gifts, no more co-signing, no more emergency payments. You're both adults with college educations and full-time jobs. You can figure out your own electrical problems and your own housing situation." "But we can't afford," Lily started. "Then you'll have to make different choices," I interrupted. "Get a smaller apartment. Buy a cheaper house. Pick up second jobs. Do what every other young couple does when they don't have family money to fall back on." Marcus stood up again, and this time his posture was aggressive. "This is insane. We made one mistake, said one thing wrong, and you're cutting us off completely." "One thing." I laughed, and the sound was not pleasant. "Marcus, you've been living off my money for 3 years while planning your escape from my company. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern of behavior." "We never asked you to pay our expenses," he shot back. "No, you just called crying every time you couldn't make ends meet, knowing I'd offer to help. That's emotional manipulation, not financial independence." Lily was sobbing now, harsh sounds that reminded me of Clara during her worst days in the hospital. But Clara's tears had been about pain and loss. These tears were about money. "Grandpa, please. We're sorry. We'll do better. We'll visit more often. We'll be more appreciative. Just don't abandon us like this." "Lily," I said gently, "I'm not abandoning you. I'm letting you grow up." They left 20 minutes later, after more tears and pleading and increasingly desperate promises to change their behavior. I watched from the window as they sat in their car in my driveway for another 10 minutes, Marcus gesticulating angrily while Lily held her face in her hands. After they drove away, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The next morning, I called Tony Reeves and accepted his offer of additional consulting work. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the project with energy I hadn't felt since Clara's diagnosis. The physical work felt good, climbing ladders, pulling wire, solving problems with my hands instead of my heart. It was 3 weeks before I heard from them again. This time it was a certified letter, delivered by a postal worker who looked embarrassed to be bringing it. The letter was from a lawyer in Harrisburg, informing me that my unilateral withdrawal of promised financial support had caused significant emotional distress and financial hardship to my granddaughter and her fiancé. The letter demanded that I honor my verbal commitment to provide $30,000 for their house down payment, and suggested that my advanced age and recent grief might be affecting my judgment in family matters. I called Jim Kinnear immediately. "They're threatening to sue me?" I asked after reading him the letter. It's a scare tactic, Jim replied. They don't have grounds for a lawsuit. You can withdraw an offer of a gift at any time before the recipient accepts it and relies on it. Since no money changed hands and no contracts were signed, they have no legal standing. What about the emotional distress part? Sam, if emotional distress from family disappointment were grounds for lawsuits, every family court in America would be backed up for decades. This is nonsense. I had Jim draft a response letter, professionally worded but crystal clear. I had made no binding commitments, I owed no money to anyone, and any further legal threats would be considered harassment. 2 days later, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Lily, drunk and crying. "Grandpa, they evicted us. We're staying at Marcus's cousin's place, and it's horrible. There's no privacy and the kids are loud and we can't cook our own food. This is all your fault." "How is your eviction my fault, Lily?" "Because you refused to help us. We couldn't afford the electrical repairs, and we couldn't find another apartment without a co-signer, and now we're homeless." "You're not homeless. You're staying with family, exactly like people do when they can't afford their own place." "This isn't what Grandma would have wanted," she sobbed. "She would have helped us. Your grandmother would have been devastated to hear what you said about me at her memorial service," I replied. "She would have been heartbroken to know you were only tolerating me for money." The line went quiet except for her crying. "Lily, I'm going to give you some advice your grandmother would have given you. Stop drinking when you're upset. Stop calling people late at night to blame them for your problems. And stop expecting other people to fund your mistakes." I hung up and unplugged the phone. The harassment continued sporadically over the next few months. Marcus would drive by my house at odd hours, sometimes sitting in his car across the street for 20 or 30 minutes. I installed a security camera and documented every incident. They tried reaching out through other family members. My sister Margaret called to say that Lily had contacted her, begging for help reaching me. "Sam," Margaret said, "I know they hurt you, but they're struggling. Maybe you could find some middle ground." "Margaret, did they tell you what they said about Clara at the memorial service?" "They said it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. They called my grief over my dead wife blue-collar whining, and said they were only tolerating me for money." "Would you find middle ground with people who said that about your husband?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted. "I wouldn't." 6 months after the memorial service, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He looked like he'd aged 5 years thinner, wearing clothes that had seen better days, dark circles under his eyes. "Mr. Grant," he said, approaching me cautiously near the produce section. "Marcus, how are you doing?" "I'm well, thank you." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to say more but not sure how to begin. "We moved back in with my parents," he said finally. "Lily's working at a call center now, and I picked up a second job doing food delivery. We're managing." "Good," I replied, selecting some apples. "Hard work builds character." "Mr. Grant, I know we can't undo what happened, but I wanted you to know that we've learned from it. We understand now how much you sacrificed for us over the years." I looked at him for a long moment. This young man who had laughed at my wife's memory and planned to escape my depressing neighborhood as soon as he got my money. "Marcus," I said, "the lesson you needed to learn wasn't about my sacrifices. It was about your character. I hope someday you figure out the difference." I paid for my groceries and drove home to the house Clara and I had filled with love for 47 years. That evening, I called Tony about expanding my consulting work. At 70 years old, I was busier and happier than I'd been in years. A year later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Lily and Marcus had gotten married in a small ceremony at his parents' church. There was no note with the invitation, just my name written on the envelope in Lily's careful handwriting. I didn't attend. Instead, I spent that Saturday afternoon at Clara's grave, telling her about the patents I'd been filing for the electrical safety devices I'd been inventing in my workshop. The royalties were already providing enough supplemental income to take the European trip we'd always planned but never afforded. "Clara," I said, kneeling beside her headstone, I kept my promise to take care of Lily. I taught her the most important lesson I could, that love and respect go together, and money without either one is just enabling. The wind rustled through the oak tree we'd planted there, and I could almost hear her voice saying what she'd always said when I worried about being too hard on the people we loved. Sam, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people learn to stand on their own. I drove home to prepare for dinner with the friends I'd made at the Seniors Tech Club, people who appreciated my stories about Clara and never made me feel like my grief was tiresome. Real family, as it turned out, had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with how people treated each other when money wasn't involved. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments below.